I am a founding member, sorry, of the peer-to-peer based UK social work network. This was established in 2011 under the aegis of the Global Development Agenda for Social Work, which was launched in 2010. And it's through the activity of this partnership that we've sought to find ways to stand in solidarity with our Palestinian colleagues. We want to explore issues surrounding the experience of our colleagues who practice under the continuous iron fist of military occupation, and who operate under a panoply of complex and prohibitive military orders. When considering the ongoing traumas and stress which this inflicts, it may be fitting that we're meeting today on World Mental Health Day. Further, when we consider the levels of racism and discrimination which Palestinians experience, it's probably apt that we're meeting together in Black History Month as well. Today, in particular, we want to consider the ways in which we use our peer-to-peer relationships as a means of standing in solidarity with our colleagues who are political prisoners. According to Adamir, the Palestinian human rights group in support of prisoners, statistics in July 2020 indicated that there were 4,500 Palestinians currently held in Israeli prisons. Out of that 4,500, 10% of them are held in military detention, which means there is no charge, no conviction, or any sentence. Also, I believe there's little concession to the risks of COVID-19 within these prisons. We are aware that repeatedly prisoners are going on hunger strike, sometimes to the point of their own deaths, to raise awareness, to protest about the abuse of their human rights. In 2017, a report to the United Nations, Israel's practices towards Palestinian people and the question of apartheid, identified that Israel had established an apartheid state in Palestine. And today we're looking at the situation relating to our Palestinian colleagues, but we'll also hear from colleagues from Hong Kong, which demonstrate that these dehumanizing practices exist wider than just in Palestine, and it's increasingly a global issue. For me personally, I remember being in Daisha camp in Bethlehem in 2016, refugee camp, largest one in the Bethlehem Governorate. And I remember the celebrations when the nephew of a friend of mine was released from prison. His name was Ghassan Zahra. He was a social work student from Bethlehem University. He'd been detained for alleged political activity and had been on hunger strike to protest against his detention. The following evening, we walked up through the labyrinth of dimly lit alleyways through the refugee camp to meet with him. He was sitting with some friends round a fire in an open cellar of a house. He seemed to be intensely serious with his hollowed cheeks and that 1,000-yard stare. Not only did he have his own experiences of prison trauma, but he was in grief for his brother, who had been a victim of extrajudicial killing whilst he had been incarcerated in prison and was on a hunger strike. I think at that moment, as the wind blew the sparks up from the fire, I felt there must be some kind of way of standing in effective solidarity with him, as he and his colleagues are routinely oppressed and imprisoned. There must be some way to hold them in awareness and stand together with them. Last year, we had the privilege of attending a vigil in Hebron for hunger strikers and hear their narratives of starving to protest. However, if people protest and nobody hears, then it is nothing but the sound of one hand clapping. We know that our colleagues continue to be arrested and detained in Palestine and elsewhere in the world, and I hope that as a profession we can start to become that other hand. And as Munter said to me, the hand which claps for justice and freedom. We're still waiting for Munter to join us. So I will move to our first speaker, who we had hoped and planned to have a contribution, and last night there were problems. I'm extremely grateful to Marwa Hamdan, who has agreed to present today. Currently, she's self-isolating in quarantine in Suffolk, pending starting a new post as a doctor in the UK. She's just arrived from Gaza this week and has first-hand experience of life under the aggressive oppression in Gaza. She's volunteered and worked in hospitals and has also researched into areas of child trauma. And she will talk about the impact of the blockade and the humanitarian crisis and recent events. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dave, for such introduction. And let me just say that it's a privilege and it's my honor to join you in this conference and to have the opportunity to speak and share my experience as a person who lived in Gaza for more than 17 years and who has the opportunity to leave Gaza twice. So let's start by my experience and in a departure from your speech, Dave, about the prisoners and about the mental health impact and illegal detention, continuing oppression for Palestinians. If we are talking about Gaza, so we are talking about the world's largest prison, or the largest prison in the world, to be honest. This is just because Gaza has been impacted and besieged by a long-lasted Israeli blockade since 2006. Maybe it's been more than a decade right now. We are suffering from this blockade and its consequences. So let's start by my own experience. The blockade means that many Palestinians are being denied their basic human rights, and one of these human rights is the freedom of movement and to be free to travel, to seek your opportunities outside Gaza. So maybe I was one of the luckiest Gazans who had the opportunity to leave Gaza, but not that lucky, in fact, because I have encountered several difficulties when I left Gaza, first in 2017 and second this week in 2020. So I got a scholarship to study at one of the high-ranking universities, UK universities, at King's College London. I studied 2 masters there. And it was my first time to leave Gaza since 17 years in 2017, and it was a life-changing experience. In fact, as a Gazan who has never left Gaza for about 17 continuous years, so it was your first time to be out of Gaza, and that was just one example. But on the other hand, there are a lot of students who are being denied this right, and who will face the risk, or who already lost their educational opportunities, they lost their job offers, maybe they lost their even right to have better care outside Gaza if they have affected by any health condition. So luckily I left Gaza in 2017. I returned to, I stayed there in the UK for 2.5 years, and then I decided to come back to Gaza. And then I remember my friends telling me, how could you risk your career and getting back to Gaza to see your family? You should be here, and you should remain in the UK. And I took the risk and get back to Gaza, knowing that I could be trapped. And I already I have been stuck in Gaza for about 8 months when I left the UK, and then I was on the risk of getting my job offer withdrawn, because nobody knows when the border will open. So I was really stressed the last couple of months following the news about Rafah border, when it will open and when it will resume its work. And luckily, I was able to arrive in the UK last week. So this is just a case which shows the daily struggle, and also it's just our basic right to travel. When you travel from Gaza, when you at the time that you leave the Gaza, the Rafah border, so you will go through a horrible journey. It's literally a horrible journey to move through Gaza and to arrive into Cairo. Maybe there's no time to speak about details about this horrible journey, but every Gazan who has to, or who travel, has to go through this horrible journey, sadly. So in fact, if we are talking about Gaza, and as a mental health professional, when I am asked to talk and speak about mental health status in the word mental health, So we are here talking about what we call a humanitarian emergency situation, in fact. So what constitutes this emergency situation, as everybody knows, maybe it's the long-lasting blockade, the Israeli blockade, which has been imposed in Gaza. So let me just give you an ordinal daily, how a day in a life of Gazan look like when he is living in Gaza under this long-lasting blockade. So Israeli blockade means that you will have only 8 hours of electricity daily. 8 hours. When you speak about 8 hours, it's 8 hours is not sufficient to meet your needs, your basic needs. It's when we are talking about individual level, and how about talking about economic sectors or healthcare system, how it is impacted by this power crisis. And in fact, electricity crisis is an ongoing crisis. It has been it's been found since 2007 until now. There is no solution. Gazans are being denied of this basic needs, the electricity and the power. And even me, at a personal experience, I have encountered electricity outages while I was doing a job online interview. So imagine this job, which I am supposed to start at West Suffolk NHS Trust. I had an electricity outage just before starting my interview. So normally an interview is a stressful condition, but it adds to the stress that you have encountered such electricity outages. But then thankfully they have understood the situation, and I have explained it, and yeah, luckily I have got the job in the end. When we are talking about a life or long-lasting blockade, we are not only talking about electricity crisis. We are also talking about high level of unemployment. So there is a very high level of unemployment in Gaza, and this has led to a growing desperation among youth. For example, if you just go and ask randomly any fresh graduate in Gaza, he will say to you, yes, I have graduated, but now I didn't find a job. And this is very reflected in the rate of salaries also in Gaza. When we're talking about high level of unemployment, even those who have been lucky enough to secure a job, they are paid less than the average salaries. So the average salaries in Gaza, I know my medical colleagues who are being paid just $300 monthly, and this is just not enough to meet their own needs. It is not enough to meet their family's need. And statistically speaking, recently it has been estimated that around 80% of Gazans are below poverty line. So we are talking about very striking number. 80% of people in Gaza are below poverty line. So this is what we talk about, or what we mean of Israeli blockade in Gaza. And above this Israeli blockade, we have the ongoing violence, and we have the ongoing Israeli escalation. So in fact, in the recent couple of years, there have been 3 major Israeli offensives in Gaza, and this has greatly impacted the mental health situation and psychological well-being among Gazans. The last devastating Israeli war was in 2014, when I was about to graduate from medical school, and I still remember this offensive, to be honest. It is not only me who have been affected. There are many who have witnessed death of their beloved families in front of their eyes. They have many traumatized children, many traumatized people in Gaza. Imagine how this will impact your mental health, and how you will have to continue this life, living this extreme hardship. This has led Palestinian, in fact, as everyone knows, in 2018 to protest on the Gaza-Israeli fence, which is known as the Great March of Return. In fact, in Great March of Return, everyone knows that it was meant to be a peaceful protest, but there was a deadly Israeli response. Israel continues to snip or to kill Palestinians who protest at their fence. And statistically speaking, again, it was estimated that around 30,000 Palestinians have been injured through Great March of Return. It is not this number. 30,000 means 30,000 family, and those who have been maybe fathers of many children, maybe youth in their early 20s. How did they continue their life after having sustained injury from Great March of Return? Just that because they have demanded to end this long-lasting blockade on Gaza. What this has resulted, or what is the real impact on mental health situation in Gaza? Having been worked as a doctor, a medical doctor at UNRWA Clinic, and also I have worked as a research assistant at one of the non-profit leading organization. I have encountered different cases of severe mental health issues among Palestinians. In fact, also according to WHO, it was estimated that around 10,000 people have severe mental health problem, with 41,000 have mild to moderate mental health problem. That means there is a lot of or high rates of mental health conditions. We are talking about clinical depression, we are talking about despair, hopelessness, which lead to suicidal attempts. And maybe if somebody knows that recently there have been a striking number and alarming number of suicidal attempts among Palestinians. The most notably is the Palestinian activists who organized the We Want to Live movement. He has committed suicide, sadly, and just 24 hours within his death, there have been 3 cases of suicidal attempts. So imagine we are talking about a large or huge hopelessness, growing desperation among Palestinian people are not able to meet their basic needs. People or youth are not finding jobs. So we are talking about high level of depression, high level of PTSD, and high level of suicidal attempts, sadly. What we have done, maybe someone will ask what we have done, what are services that we can provide to people who suffers from mental health condition. In fact, there are a lot of obstacles when we are talking about mental health services. We are talking about lack of specialized mental health service, lack of specialists as well in mental health service, and above all, the stigma which surrounds the mental health in general among conservative or among Palestinian society. I hope this will get better soon, and we will manage somehow to tackle such problems. And I hope that situation will be a bit better, because many people have been really suffering for long years, sadly. Yeah. Maybe Dave, you can take over right now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Marwa. I mean, that really does describe in a very powerful way what it feels like to live with the reality of words that we use, and we see frequently blockades, and the sense of oppression that comes with that. And it's been a really useful start to just have that context, really, to kind of be able to orientate ourselves around some of the other material that we're going to share. I'm delighted, and I've got to say relieved, that our other participants are now with us. And it's my pleasure to introduce a colleague, Munter Ramirez. I've known Munter, and we've presented together previously. And has extraordinary stories to tell. He's a Palestinian social worker and activist. He lives in Ida camp in Bethlehem. It's under the inescapable presence and surveillance of the military wall, which is right up next to the camp. I know he continuously struggles for justice and tries to uphold human rights through persistent non-violent means. He's nearly always at the forefront of protests about the occupation. He's been arrested and imprisoned on several occasions. He's also the previous chair of the Palestinian Union of Social Workers and Psychologists. I think what's particularly interesting is that he was arrested in 2018 whilst protesting against the detention of Ahab Tamimi. And there was a global response because of his role within the Union of Social Workers to raise awareness about this. And, you know, it sort of set minds racing. Where we can do it for Munter, we've got to be able to start thinking about doing this for other people now and find these avenues of solidarity. So I'd really like to hand over to Munter now and for him to share with you some of the experiences he's had. So Munter, thank you.
Hi for all. Thank you for this opportunity to speak about our experience as Palestinians in Gaza or in the prisons all over Palestine, where we are living a very hard life. Every time when I'm hearing about Gaza and what's happening in Gaza, like it is the first time that I saw the picture. Unfortunately, the situation is very bad. And I start hating numbers because we are facing very hard numbers with the people who are suffering from the occupation. Not from anything else, it's the occupation. This is the most important thing in our issue. But as Rafik Ziad said, we are teaching life. Yes, we have the dark part of the picture, how the people are suffering from the blockade, the siege around Gaza, and here from killing the people in Hebron, in the alternative roads that they done, confiscating our land, doing all the violations against the human rights. Even today, we were trying to cultivate our land, to pick olives, to harvest our olive trees. We were forbidden to reach our olive trees. So every simple part of our life as Palestinians is a real suffer. And we are suffering a lot in every single detail of our life. We are living in very big prison, the prison of Gaza. I think it's the biggest prison on the whole world. And they are treating us in very severe way that they want to kill us every day. The children, the adults, the young people, the old people. Even at the end, they don't want us even to express ourselves. Since I want to speak about the prisoners, the Palestinian prisoners, we have thousands of political prisoners in prison. Women, children, sick people are in prison. So we are fighting in a serious way inside prison, which affect us in very big way. But the other, as I told you, that we have another part of the picture. For myself, I was in an isolated prison for 6 months. People were sentenced for life. People have spent more than, I would say, more than 25 years, some of them. I'm speaking about at least 40 of them from 120 prisoners in the same prison, that they spent more than 25 years. And even though they still have the hope, they still consider themselves as freedom fighters, that they want to live free, and they would fight again for the freedom of the Palestinian people. This is the prisoners in Palestine. You would not find any prisoner who killed himself because he's facing depression, or because of the violations of the Israeli guards. So these are the Palestinian prisoners. We have at least now 1,500 administrative detention prisoners. They are there with no charges. They just, because they are a Palestinian activist, they are now in the Israeli jails. So they would suffer more, because imagine yourself finishing 6 months at the day that you have to be released, to go to your family, you prepare yourself, and they would come with a new decision that they postponed your freedom for another 6 months, and you will be for another 6 months or 7 months or 4 months again. And it happens for, imagine some of the prisoners, it happened for years. I would give an example of our colleague Nidal Bakar. He's from the Hesha refugee camp. He spent 8 years under the administrative detention. Imagine that. Every time he was promised from the Israeli court that he would go home, that they would postpone his freedom again. Now Nidal Bakar, he's again in the Israeli jails. He just started a new cycle. He spent till now nearly 4 months, and we don't know. They said that they will release him after 6 months, but I think that he will not be released. It's not just the suffering of the Palestinian prisoners. Imagine, because of the virus, the COVID, that the Palestinian families could not visit their children, their people in the Israeli jails. And they don't know what is happening with them. They don't have any kind of connection. Imagine that since the beginning of the COVID, that there are prisoners that they didn't saw their families even once. They had just one phone call from the beginning of the COVID. So this is one of the things that affected them a lot. Because of that, we are trying to be with the families always, to support them, to follow their problems, to send our social workers to work with them, especially with the prisoners who have their wives, their children waiting for them, and they don't know if they were affected or not. Because of that, we did a campaign called Mazyuna Fair. Mazyuna is the mother of one of our prisoners in Aida. So we tried to send the pictures of the families through the TV that reached the prisoners inside. This was one of the most important things that we have done. For our experience even as a social workers or as a non-violence activist in Palestine, it's the same. It doesn't matter what you did for the occupation. The matter is not to raise your voice, to live as a slave. They want us to live as slaves here, and they would run everything. They would take your homeland, and you have to remain silent. They would come and demolish your house, and you have to remain silent. They would come and kill your son, and you have to remain silent. If you said my son was a hero, you would go to prison. There are parents of prisoners, of Palestinian prisoners. They spend years in prison just because they said, after the death of their lovers, that they were heroes. They were sentenced that they are supporting the revolution. So it's not easy to be a Palestinian prisoner. They would humiliate you. It's not easy even to, after your release, it will not be easy to continue your life. You will be under pressure always. Even after I was released, the Israeli intelligence sent for me for a meeting, and at the end they said, the next time it will not be you, it will be you and your son. So this is how they are dealing with us. They want us to shut our mouth, but we will not. We are continuing our struggle against the occupation. So now, maybe it's the worst situation for the Palestinian prisoners. The prisoners don't know what is happening with their families, and the families don't know what's happening with the prisoners, because everything is isolated between the prisoners and their families. One of the good experiences that I have to go through before my time go out, the support of the social workers from all over the world. This campaign that happened, it does not support me alone. It supported all the prisoners that was with us in the same prison. When they saw that someone is interested of their life, of their freedom, someone is supporting us as prisoners, would stand with them, they would continue their struggle to the freedom. And my message that all of these people, they are not criminals, they are not killers, they are freedom fighters who went through the struggle so as to have the freedom of the Palestinian people. If you would count the social workers who went through this experience, you would find thousands of these people who have passed this experience, and they are part of the struggle against the occupation. One of their important rule now, not just to deal with the people, even to deal against the occupation. We are part of the struggle of the Palestinian people. We are not just social workers. We are social workers. We are freedom fighters. We are human rights activists. So it's a complicated work that the social workers here in Palestine are doing. I know that my time went out, but I think through the discussion we will have a lot of questions. I would be ready to answer the questions.
That's fantastic. That was really so grateful for that, Munter. And I think you've raised what for me is a critical issue, that if we start to support individuals, it filters round, and as we talked about last year, it was about the other hand clapping, wasn't it? It was about the sense of solidarity. So thank you so much for sharing that, and I'm sure it will provoke some questions and discussion later on. I'd like to move on to our next speaker, and we're very privileged to have Dr. Asad Abushak, who's lived and worked in Gaza, but is now currently living in Dublin, which is where he studied for his PhD in linguistics. His family fled to Gaza as refugees from the Nakba, and so has a very intimate knowledge of the situation in Gaza. He's also interesting from our point of view. He's a deputy chairperson of Adamir, the Palestinian Human Rights Organization for Prisoners. And we have talked considerably with Adamir about sharing of information and how to find ways to be in solidarity. So it's a really interesting dynamic. Within Gaza, he's also a member of the Higher National Committee for the Right to Return, which people will know is a major movement within Gaza to raise awareness about the abuse of civil liberties and denial of a chance to return to their villages. He's also an activist in the Bds Campaign, and I see there's some questions arising about that. And over above that, he's got his own experiences of imprisonment in the notorious Ashkelon prison. As Munter said, many people have got this experience. My understanding is about 40% of the adult male population of Palestine has some experience of arrest and detention. He's also completing a new book which considers the coterminosity between political prisoners both in Palestine and in Ireland, which starts to take it out into a sort of a more global agenda. So I'm really pleased to hand over to Dr. Asad, and over to you. Thank you. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, Assad, you need to unmute yourself, please.
No, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that's great. Can you start again?
Yes, I am very much honored to talk to you today about my own people and my Palestine, about the freedom of my own people and their just cause. If I want to start, let me quote T.S. Eliot, who describes the situation in Gaza, actually in his own words. It's life and death and death and life. When, you know, during the war, when London was bombed all day. So this is the situation in Gaza, life and death and life. It's a land of waste and a wasteland. And in the words of Ilan Pape, who wrote a book, his last book in 2018, it's called The Biggest Prison on Earth. He talks about Gaza as maximum security prison. And he talks about open air prison and about concentration camps in Gaza. But I want to move also, who is the cause of all this? I must also refer to Lord Toynbee, that great Irish, British historian, who says, as an Irishman, as an Englishman, I hate to have to indict my country for the Balfour Declaration, but this is the only personal reparation I can make. So remember, the root of the problem started with the Balfour Declaration, and this is why we are refugees, and we are up to this moment driven into the wilderness and into the desert. Ever since my country, Palestine was occupied, as you are aware, in 1948. And then, of course, most of the Palestinian people were evicted by the Zionist gangs at that time. Palestinians, of course, live in many refugee camps, and we have been ever since longing for return and calling for our right of return, but unfortunately our call fell on deaf ears simply because of imperialism and colonialism, and they planted a settler colonial state. And the difference between a settler colonial state and a colonial state is that the settler colonialism is based on two factors. One, dehumanization. Two, elimination. That is to say, they started to dehumanize the Palestinian people in order to eliminate them and to consider them non-entities. And henceforth, we are Israel in 2018 under Netanyahu categorized the Palestinian people when Israel, of course, issued that law, the nation state law, categorized the Palestinian people into refugee, homeless, occupied, terrorist, so on and so forth. So that is to say, they do not even recognize that there is a people called Palestine. And this is why Israel put hundreds, thousands and thousands of Palestinians into prison. Ever since 1967, almost 1 million Palestinians, 1 million Palestinians were put into jails. Up to this moment, as I am speaking to you, one of them, one of these great heroes of Palestine, who entered his 76th day of hunger strike because he is fighting for the freedom of his people, Maher al-Akhras, he entered his 76th day. Probably he will die, he will pass away, God forbid, because he is in Israeli prisons. There are, these Palestinian prisoners are in 20 man most security prisons, most ugly security, the ugliest security prisons, 21, whether it is in Nafha or Ashkelon or many other prisons. And up to this moment, there are 4,500, out of them 40 women, 150 children, 700 are suffering from all types of illnesses, such as cancer, heart disease, kidney disease, all other disease, and of course, with total medical negligence, and nobody cares for them. There are well over 50 or 70 of them are sentenced for 20 or 25, or some of them For example, Nael al-Barghouti, he spent almost 40 years, and Karim Yunus, well over 35 years, is still in prison. So that is to say, there are children, men, women, all age groups are in Israeli prison. And unfortunately, although the international community, and although, for example, Red Cross and some people, some good men all over the world try to put pressure on Israel, yet Israel, because of being supported by America, by Trump, by the UK, by the West, unfortunately, all these voices fell on deaf ears. Israel, let me how that happened. You see, when Israel started as settler colonial state, according to Baruch Kammerlang, Ilan Pape, Ev Schleim, and many other, Tom Segev, many other Israeli historiographers, they said Israel followed the following, or used actually, the following types of crimes against the Palestinian people. Number one, genocide. Two, ethnocide, to totally cleanse Palestine from the Palestinians. Politicide, to destroy all political Palestinian entities in Palestine. Herbicide, to destroy the Palestinian cities and then to rename them, to give them Hebrew name. And then memoricide, to try to change the names of things and the change of towns in order to make the people forget. That is to say, there was a process of pumping in more Jews and pumping out more Palestinians, in the word of Palestinian late historian Faiz Said. So that is to say, the Palestinians now, are totally under occupation, or in refugee camps, or homeless, or displaced. And unfortunately, although there are many resolutions from the United Nations, there were many resolutions issued for the Palestinians. For example, resolution 194, which calls for our right of return and compensation. It was issued in 1948. I think the Americans supported that for 33 times. And now this resolution, which calls for our right of return, which was issued by the United Nations, by the international community, unfortunately, Israel wouldn't accept to implement it, and wouldn't accept even, Netanyahu said one single Palestinian refugee will not be able to return. The United Nations also took another resolution, 3236, which calls for the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including our right to self-determination, our right of return, our right of statehood, our right of sovereignty, even our right to use all legitimate means to liberate our own country, Palestine. Yet, unfortunately, simply because Israel is being supported by America and by the West, Israel, of course, and being given all sorts of weapons, lethal weapons, Israel wouldn't care. On the contrary, Israel in the last 10 years launched 3 genocidal wars. I personally was in Gaza during these 3, and I miraculously survived because my flat was completely destroyed. The building in which the tower in which I was living, 4 or 5 flats were completely destroyed, and I miraculously with my family survived that. Of course, before that, there were many other wars against Gaza, 1967, 1956, 1973, and I, with my family, we were, of course, moved from place to place. We were Syrian refugees. Yet, the Palestinian people, as I say, I am talking to you, we can say that the Palestinian people cannot surrender, and we will continue the struggle. Our struggle is similar to the struggle of the Irish people, because the prisoners in the history, the hunger strikers in the history of Ireland, and the hunger strikers in the history of Palestine are similar, because they were fighting for the same cause, fighting for freedom, fighting for peace, fighting for equality, fighting to live as masters in their own country. And at the end of the day, freedom will win the day, and Palestine will be free, and all the Palestinians need and want is to live in honor and dignity in Palestine. This is why the Palestinians call for a democratic state in Palestine for all people, where Jews, Christians, Christians, Muslims, believers, non-believers live in Palestine regardless of color, sex, ethnicity, or truth. This is why we call upon all the world to support the BDS movement, which is very, very important as an international solidarity movement which supports the Palestinian people, and it worked well and it was effective in the case of South Africa. We call upon the whole world to support this peaceful movement and support the Palestinian people, which is similar to the Great March of Return, which is also peaceful. Yet Israel, although the Great March of Return was peaceful and non-violent, and it was only, it carried only a sense of feeling and sentiment to the land, to Palestine, yet the Israelis started to shoot, to kill, and this is what they use against the Palestinian people. We call upon the whole world, to support the Palestinian people in their just cause, because peace starts in Palestine, and unless the Palestinian people are reinstated, and unless our country is free, I don't think that there is any just peace. Although Israel is trying to impose its Pax Israelita similar to Pax Americana, yet the Palestinian people will continue their struggle. We cannot be overcome. We will win. Palestine will be free. Thank you.
Fantastic. You've raised some really important points there, and I see they're coming up in the questions. So we'll pick up the points about BDS, etc. But yeah, it was an extraordinary presentation and very well put out, and covered so many different areas, which are indicative of living under a totalitarian state, which probably takes us on to some, and we're delighted to have some to join us from Hong Kong today to pick up these issues about this. We're looking at it from a Palestinian point of view, but this is a global issue. Some is a social worker in Hong Kong. I believe he's the former chairperson of the Hong Kong Policy Viewers, which is a monitoring group, I guess. He participates in social movements and is currently a social work educator. So I'm delighted to have you join us this afternoon, Sam. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, David. Yes, I would like to speak about the social worker participation in the anti-extradition bill movement in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong and Chinese officials have escalated their rhetoric on the education sector, social welfare sector in recent months, accusing teachers, social workers, and social work educators of inciting anti-China sentiments and encouraging students to oppose the authorities, and blaming them for the mass anti-government protest last year. That is the anti-extradition bill movement. The national security norm is aimed at stamping out activities like the pro-democracy protest, which our social worker is very valued in Hong Kong, and cultivate young people to be in the empowerment structure to strive for the democracy. Mr. Siu Ka-chun has taught social work at the Baptist University of Hong Kong for 11 years. From the anti-extradition bill movement, we can see that the academic freedom and social work education is being damaged. His teaching has been consistently rated as excellent. He was jailed as a political prisoner last year for inciting public nuisance in the 2014 civil disobedience Occupy Central movement, or sometimes we call it the umbrella movement. And after his release, he was removed from teaching duties, pending disciplinary proceedings linked to his conviction. We truly believe his effective dismissal amounted to political persecution, but the university gave him no explanation. Some of the social work groups sent petition letters to the university chancellor, president, faculty dean, and social work department head. They replied, not with thanks, or they replied, they acknowledged the receipt of our petition letter without any follow-up explanation of Mr. Siu Ka-chun's dismissal. This incident took place within a month of the passing of a strict broadly defined national security law that bans acts of secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign force. Jokingly speaking, I'm not sure whether I am colluding foreign force here, because the national security law is so broad. The widespread influence is the self-censorship on social work education. When Baptist University don't safeguard the human rights of its lecturers, how do they teach social work with human rights values and social justice values? How do other departments of social work in other universities in Hong Kong safeguard their lecturer, professor, and students when they are facing struggle from the national security law? Let's say when they discuss democracy development in Hong Kong or during their lecture. It is a worrying alarm. Self-censorship would easily become a common practice among social work departments in Hong Kong. Every single word can be used against us. We don't know the baseline. We don't know the red line. We don't know whether when we discuss about the democratic development in China will commit the national security law. Another issue is the challenge of social workers at demonstration scene to safeguard the protesters' rights and safety. It is estimated that at least 20 social workers in Hong Kong mediated in clashes with anti-government protests over the past year were jailed. Police officers have been using unreasonable charges to arrest frontline social workers in the protest. The role of social workers to safeguard human rights of protesters and social justice is being challenged violently. One fresh graduated social worker was standing in front of police officers and asked them to slow down to allow the protesters time to leave. However, he was sentenced to a year in the anti-extradition law movement. He was the first social worker to be sentenced from this movement, and other 2 social workers are jailed for participating in the protest as well. Another social worker, Ms. Jackie Chan, has been trying to defuse tensions at the protest, was arrested and charged with rioting, an offense punishable by at least 10 years in prison. It was increasingly difficult for us as a social worker to do our job at the front line. For example, social workers had been trying to get the names and emergency contacts of protesters arrested at the scene, so they could arrange lawyers and notify family members. Police officers have been pushing us away and accusing us of obstructing them. But how obstructive could we be when we are just asking arrestees for their details? 2 social workers group, Battlefield Social Worker Group and Reclaiming Social Work Movement, who have volunteered to monitor police behavior, liaise between protesters and the force, as well as provide emotional support at demonstration sites to our young protesters. However, a fellow social worker was hit on the head with a police baton during a dispersal operation, blood dripping from his head as was all over the ground. It was just some example of our social workers in Hong Kong participated in the anti-extradition bill movement, who, however, we are afraid that the long term we enjoy the freedom of speech, civil rights in Hong Kong are damaged heavily by the Chinese Communist Party and its Hong Kong government. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Son. That was, it just shows the relevance, I think, of taking a globalized view. And I think the issues you've raised about self-censorship and self-surveillance and how behavior is conditioned by the forces of oppression is incredibly powerful and a common theme. We've had some great presentations and I'm truly grateful. We have some questions that have come in. Firstly, you know, any ideas about what we can do? How do social workers, or what can social workers do across the world to raise solidarity amongst our officers and in our workplaces and with our colleagues? I don't know, would you like to come in on that one, Munter, because you've had the direct experience?
You hear me?
You want me to repeat the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. It was basically just asking, what do you think that social workers can do to raise solidarity with our Palestinian prisoners, colleagues who are prisoners?
Many things. You know, as I told you, the way that the people stand with me during my suffering in the Israeli jails, it does not affect me, as I told you, alone. It affected me as social worker, yes, but it affects the people who were with me in the same cells. It affects my family to continue without any kind of, you know, of psychological even problems. They feel themselves that what I have done was the right way. So it supported them. So what the people can do, a lot. First of all, the most important thing, you know, to spread the knowledge about the occupation and what is the occupation is doing. It is not a big act, but this act is the most important thing. It's the essence of any action, so anyone can do it. And I think you yourself had this experience through your knowledge. When you have the knowledge, you came and you visit, you saw by your eyes, you have the experience. So after that, I think that everyone who have come here after this knowledge about what is the violations which happened with the social workers here in Palestine and the Palestinians in general, it affects the people. So, but the most important act that anyone all over the world can do, not just the social workers, is the BDS campaign. To be part of the BDS campaign, isolating Israel and, you know, boycotting Israel. It's not an idea of throwing the people into the sea or killing the people. It is one of the non-violence tools that we are using. It is an idea to put pressure into this, you know, this bad government, these criminals who are doing genocides against the people in Gaza and genocide against the land here in the West Bank and against our prisoners inside, to stop them and to tell them, we are here. You know, I would tell you all that the most complicated situation is now, because we are feeling that the Palestinian people start being alone.
Thank you.
Maybe some people would say no, but I would say we are now alone. We need people to stand with us, not to send us to the corner and start a new violence, a new cycle of violence, which would affect us first. Even if the idea not to leave the Palestinians alone. The Arabs left us alone. We don't want the international community or the human rights defenders all over the world to leave the Palestinians with this fight alone.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the other questions that's come in is about does resistance, making that stand against the oppression, actually help to improve the mental health of people if you're knowing you're making a stand and you know, making some sort of statement of resistance? Does that help to improve the mental health? I don't know which one of who would like to come back with me on that one. Marwa?
unmute myself. Okay, so this is a very good question, and in fact, very important question to ask. So when we talk about resistance, yes, to some degree, it helps improve the mental health. Like some research might have a negative impact or negative consequences of being involved in a decolonization movement, maybe. Because you will expose yourself to different risks for sure, but to somehow being able to say no will give you a sense of agency and a sense of autonomy. Being able to resist will give you this sense, and this will might help improving mental health in a shorter term, maybe temporarily, but we are here looking for the longer term outcome. Resistance has no means if there is no given rights to the person who resists or who struggle. If we will continue struggling and struggling without an outcome, then it will affect you negatively. But this is very complex because we are talking about conflict, political conflict. We are talking about different issues here. So I just remember a psychiatrist who argues about this particular issue, who's well known. He wrote an essay concerning violence. And he was arguing that a man or a nation who's under occupation must resist in order to get this sense of autonomy and this sense of agency. And this happened in the Great March of Britain. If we talk, for example, the great example of the martyr whose name is Najjar, that youth who was killed by Israeli snipers, and it was out of despair and out of if you look at her life, she was getting maybe. I hear that she has struggled a lot, and she didn't find a job. She went to volunteer as a healthcare work as a nurse in a Great March of Britain, but she ended up being killed by Israeli snipers. So this act of resistance I suppose that it gave her this better sense of agency and autonomy. That's why she has decided to do so, even though she realized that she might end up dead. Yeah. And that's what happened.
That's great, thank you. I've just noticed we're running really short of time. Munter, did you want to come back in with something quickly? You need to unmute.
I just want to add short notice. Yes, it affects to fight, yes. To live free would affect, the mental health of the people. Yes, it affects them in very positive way. If not, Israel, what wants Israel to do with us? They want us to live as slaves. Living as a slave would not help anyone here. So the idea to be a human rights defender, especially for the social workers, would help all the people of the Palestinian people. Most of our mental problems is not because of our daily social life. Most of our mental problems have been here because of the siege in Gaza, or the getting the people in prison here, or demolishing the houses, the checkpoints. Imagine that we have more than 400 checkpoints in the West Bank. Imagine how much it would affect our mental life or our mental health here in Palestine. So many obstacles of our life. If we would finish all these obstacles or these violations from the occupation, yes, we would live free and without many of these social
That's an argument for people to come and visit and find out and do some education for themselves. Yes. Really. Absolutely, thank you. Yes. We're running pretty late on time. I just want to quickly come back to you, Dr. Assad, because one of the questions has been about the value of BDS. And just in a minute, I guess, could you say something about what you see the value of it being? And you need to unmute. You need to unmute.
Yeah. Do you hear me now?
Yes, good. Go, go, go.
Yeah. I think let me but refer to one point about first the importance of resistance, because Professor Paulo Freire, that Brazilian educationalist, wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And he insisted that those people who are oppressed or under incubation must resist for their mental health. To go back to PDS, PDS is very, very important. It's gaining ground all over the world, gaining support, and it was effective in the case of South Africa. And this is why we have a free South Africa now. And I think that if the whole world support the PDS, divest from Israeli economy and impose sanctions on, boycott it and impose sanctions on its rulers and bring its rulers to bring them to trial, to accountability for the crimes they committed against the Palestinian people, I think Israel will be isolated, a rogue state, a weak state, and henceforth Israel will be forced then to sit with the Palestinians, and there will be one democratic state for everybody with equality and justice in Palestine. This is why I call upon everybody all over the world to join this very, very important BDS movement. This is why Israel, of course, is trying to do all its best to delegitimize it. And unfortunately, some of the Western countries are supporting it, but we are lucky enough that the legal system in some of these countries, such as Britain and France, are supporting the BDS or didn't delegitimize it. And all over the world now, we are gaining support in the campuses, trade unions, journalists, MPs, so on and so forth.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think if we don't take a stance, then we're presumed to be colluding with the occupation. And that's the narrative that gets out there, you know, that it must be okay because we're colluding with it. Quickly, if I come back to you, Summa, this, you know, this idea about the, you know, a global connectivity about, you know, resistance through professional peers. Is that something you have any views about at all?
I think international solidarity is very important, especially the widespread of the authoritarian regime in Hong Kong. Yeah, we need the solidarity from worldwide, especially when our academic freedom and the social education is damaged heavily. And the other thing is, how do we as a social worker to protect our young protesters in Hong Kong, especially when they are striking for the democratic development of Hong Kong? The young people is our future, and what we as a social worker to look for from the young people is them to take up the active citizens' role in Hong Kong. However, when they ask for democracy or to participate in democratic movements in Hong Kong, they are suppressed. Some of them died because of suspected police brutality. Some of them are being thrown from high-rise buildings. Some of them are died whatsoever. And a month ago, 12 people, most of them are young people, would like to flee from Hong Kong to Taiwan. However, when they sail to the outer sea of Hong Kong, a China tank arrests them, and they are arrested in the mainland China. Even they are not, their family and relatives and friends could not visit them in a China prison. You see, this kind of human rights is not safeguarded in mainland China. It's time for the world to stand up with us to fight against the authoritarian regime. Maybe we are not against the Chinese government, but we have to strive for and stand for the democratic way of life. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you've raised the issue there, and I think the issue of being political prisoners creates an absence. People are absent from their work, from their family, from their community, from their political life, from their cultural life, absent in so many different ways. And how do you make that absence dynamic? And I kind of think that the opposite of absence in this context isn't presence, but it's belonging. And how do we create a sense of belonging? Because if we say we're members of a global profession and we belong to each other, and we can do something that's going to bring that sentiment alive, then I think we're starting to talk about solidarity. And if we can start to think along those lines as peers to peer, I think it would generate some extraordinary energy. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure for me to chair this meeting and to present it. I'm extraordinarily grateful to everybody who's presented. A lot of wisdom, a lot of insight, and a lot of passion, and an awful lot of experience. That is quite humbling to hear. I'm also very grateful for Rory, who's been doing all the tech stuff and making sure this all kind of works. We're fielding people from Palestine, from the UK, from Hong Kong, from Dublin, and me in Newcastle. There's a link for a email address, and if people would like to start to think about mobilizing and maybe picking up some of the ideas that Munter's been talking about, how to mobilize solidarity with Palestinian social workers who are prisoners. And we do know them. We know there are some out there. We don't think we know them all. We can start to think about that. So send me a message and then we'll take it from there. But once again, can I just say to Marwa, to Som, to Assad and to Munter, huge thanks for this afternoon. I'm so grateful, and I think it's been, hopefully people feel it's been a really useful conference and event. Thank you very much indeed.